The string quartet hadn't even finished their final note when the first gasp shattered the ceremony. For a heartbeat, no one in St. Lucia's chapel understood what they were seeing. The child stood in the aisle like an apparition. 9 years old, hair the color of wheat, trembling hands wrapped around a pistol too heavy for her frame. And then she spoke. "You're my dad, aren't you?" The words sliced through the air, cleaner than the ring of the church bell above. Tony Romano, the groom, the legend, the man who'd built an empire out of blood and loyalty, froze at the altar. His bride, Isabella Devereaux, a former prosecutor who had vowed to end men like him, turned pale beneath her veil. The guests, politicians, mobsters, and the kind of people whose smiles could buy silence, laughed at first. They thought it was an act. But when the girl's hand shook and the cold gleam of the barrel caught the light from the stained glass, laughter died fast. "Sweetheart," Tony began, his voice cracking in a way that made even his bodyguards glance at him twice. "Put that down!" Cindy Matthews didn't move. The blue dress she wore looked like something borrowed from another life. Creased, rain-stained, torn at the hem. Her shoes didn't match. Her lips quivered, but her eyes didn't. "My mom said you'd protect me," she whispered. The organ's hum faltered. Someone coughed. And for the first time in years, the man everyone feared forgot how to breathe. He'd buried his past deeper than any grave, and yet it stood before him now, small and shaking, carrying his mother's eyes and his own defiance. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. A storm was coming, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Isabella's veil slipped as she turned toward him. "Tony," she hissed. "What is she talking about?" Tony's mouth opened, but no sound came. The weight of his sins pressed down like the marble saints staring from the chapel walls. Behind the pews, the best man, Rico Vega, shifted his coat. The movement was too smooth, too practiced. The metallic click of a safety being disengaged echoed faintly, swallowed by the silence. Cindy's hand trembled harder. "Don't," Tony said sharply, eyes flicking toward Rico. "Nobody moves." The tension in the room tightened like piano wire. "Please," Cindy said again. "Don't make them take me back. He's coming. The man with the scar, he's coming." The words jolted Tony. The scar. Justin Radcliffe. The name burned like acid in his mind. He took one slow step forward, palms open. "Cindy, look at me. Who told you to come here?" "My mom," she said. Before she... Her voice cracked, breaking the last piece of Tony Romano's composure. The guests began to murmur. Too loudly, too nervously. The whispers spread like smoke. "Tony Romano has a daughter? Is this a setup? Get the boss out of here." He barely heard them. The past had walked into his future and pulled the trigger without firing a shot. And then, from somewhere beyond the chapel doors, came the wail of sirens. Faint at first, then closer. Closer. Tony's pulse hammered. His instincts, those old, buried instincts, snapped awake. Whoever sent that child here wasn't going to let her live long enough to tell him why. "Where's your mother now?" he asked softly. "She's sick. She said to find you before she dies." "Before she dies." The sirens screamed louder, and that's when it hit him. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. The man who'd spent his life turning enemies into ghosts was about to be haunted by the one thing he couldn't kill: his own blood. He glanced toward the back of the chapel, eyes narrowing at the glint of movement beyond the frosted glass doors. A shadow lingered there, watching, waiting. Tony turned back to the trembling girl and felt something unfamiliar crawl up his throat. Fear. "Cindy," he whispered, "when I tell you to run, you run." The camera of the live stream, A small device perched discreetly near the altar captured it all. Later, the footage would go viral, replayed across millions of screens. A little girl, a wedding, a gun, a name that could bring an empire to its knees. But in that moment, inside that chapel heavy with breath and judgment, there was only one truth left to uncover. Was Tony Romano, the devil of New York, the father she was looking for, or the man she needed protection from? Before we proceed, tell me this. What would you have done if a child pointed a gun at you and called you Dad? Drop your thoughts below and make sure you've subscribed, because this story's just getting started. When the sirens faded and the guests were ushered out, St. Lucia's chapel became a tomb of silence. Tony Romano sat in the first pew, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the gun still lying where Cindy had dropped it. A little pink ribbon was tied around the handle, as if someone had tried to make something deadly look like a toy. He'd ordered men killed for less than what she'd done today. Yet now, all he could think about was how small her hand had been, how terrified, how familiar. The storm outside cracked the sky open, spilling rain down the chapel's stained glass. In the reflection, Tony saw a version of himself he didn't recognize, a man caught between two worlds, one dressed in silk and vows, the other dripping in blood. Isabella stood at the altar still, her bouquet wilted in her hands. She hadn't spoken since the police arrived, since the security detail whispered something in her ear that made her face go cold. "She's not lying," Isabella said at last, her voice low but sharp. "DNA records. Your name's on file at Mount Sinai Hospital, a birth record from 9 years ago." Tony looked up. "That's impossible." "Is it?" The accusation stung harder than it should have. Isabella wasn't just his bride. She'd been his clean slate, his redemption. Marrying her meant stepping into daylight after a lifetime underground, but daylight has a way of exposing the rot. He rubbed his temples. "Virginia Matthews," he murmured. The name came uninvited, like an echo from a forgotten decade. "I haven't heard that name in years." "You remember her?" "I remember everything." And he did. The summer of 2015. The safe house in Queens. A woman with fire in her voice and sadness in her smile. She'd been his informant, his lover, and his undoing. When she disappeared, he thought it was to save herself. He never imagined she'd been saving someone else. Now that someone else was a child who stood in front of a chapel full of killers, begging for his protection. Cindy sat alone in a side room with Rico Vega watching the door. She hadn't cried. Not once. She just held a crumpled photograph in her lap. Her mother, pale but smiling, sitting beside a younger Tony in an old Mustang. Rico cleared his throat. "Kid, you hungry?" She shook her head. "You scared?" She didn't answer that either. He sighed and glanced toward the window. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Marching into a mob boss's wedding with a gun? Hell, I've seen grown men wet themselves looking at Tony Yu. You didn't even blink." Cindy's reply was soft but steady. "He's my dad. He was supposed to protect us." Rico's grin faded. He'd served Tony long enough to know that every debt eventually came due. Meanwhile, in the nave, Isabella turned her anger into precision. "So that's it? You just forgot you had a daughter?" Tony's voice broke. "I didn't know." "And what happens now? You take her home? Introduce her to your friends in the syndicate?" "I'll keep her safe." "From who? The police? Or yourself?" Her words cut deeper than any bullet. Before he could respond, the heavy doors creaked open. A man in a soaked trench coat entered, one of Tony's security chiefs. His expression was pale, uneasy. "Boss," he said, lowering his voice, "we got a situation. Someone tripped an alarm at the perimeter. Looks like cops, but not local uniforms. Radcliffe's crew." Tony stiffened. "How close?" "Half a mile and closing." Isabella stepped forward. Tony, what's going on?" He didn't answer her. He was already moving. Fast, controlled, the way predators move when the cage door opens. In the side room, Cindy lifted her head as footsteps approached. Tony entered, soaked in shadows and regret. She studied him like a puzzle she already knew the answer to. "Your mom. She told you to find me?" he asked. "She said you were the only one who could stop them. The man with the scar, he said she owed him. He said when she died, I'd be next." Her voice cracked at the end. For the first time, Tony saw past the trembling bravado to the terrified child underneath. He knelt down, meeting her eye level. "You did good, kid. You got here alive. That's more than most people can say." Cindy frowned. "You don't believe me, do you?" Tony hesitated. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to say he'd burn the city to the ground if anyone touched her. But the truth was uglier. He wasn't sure if he could protect her without becoming the man he'd tried to bury. He reached for the photo in her lap. The image was faded, grainy, but there he was, smiling. A man he barely recognized. "Your mom kept this all these years?" "She said you'd come back. You never did." Lightning flashed, illuminating the window pane. In that flicker, Tony saw something outside. Movement, a shape near the tree line. Watching. He rose to his feet. "Rico, get Isabella, we're leaving, now." "Boss, the police are the least of our problems." He turned to Cindy. "You trust me?" Her nod was hesitant but real. "Then do exactly what I say." He held out his hand. She stared at it for a long moment before taking it. Her small fingers curled into his palm, fragile but certain. And in that instant, Tony Romano, criminal, husband, liar, felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. As they headed for the side exit, the chapel lights flickered. Somewhere distant, an engine revved. The past was coming for all of them. But for the first time, Tony wasn't planning to run. "Tell me, what would you have done in Tony's shoes? Would you believe the girl, or think it was a setup? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe if you're hooked, because the real danger hasn't even arrived yet." The rain hit like bullets as Tony Romano led Cindy through the side exit of St. Lucia's chapel. The marble steps glistened under the floodlights, and the limousine that was supposed to carry him and Isabella to the reception sat idling like a ghost waiting for orders. "Rico, the back route!" Tony snapped. "Move!" Rico yanked open the car door and shoved Cindy inside, then scanned the tree line. "Boss, we've got movement. 6, maybe 7. Tactical formation, not NYPD." Tony's jaw clenched. Radcliffe. The name tasted like rust in his mouth. Justin Radcliffe, a cop once so dirty the department buried his crimes under sealed files. Years ago, Tony had bought his silence. Now Radcliffe was cashing in on every sin left unpaid. Inside the limo, Isabella sat rigid, her wedding gown soaked and clinging to her skin. "Tony, tell me what's happening." "Trouble." "That's not an answer." He turned to her, eyes darker than the storm outside. "You wanted to marry a man with a past? Congratulations. It just showed up to crash the wedding." The first gunshot cracked the night. Glass exploded across the hood. Cindy screamed, ducking under the seat. "Get her down!" Tony barked, pulling his sidearm from beneath his jacket. The driver slumped forward before he could shift gears. One clean shot to the temple. Rico cursed. "We're boxed in, boss." Tony kicked the door open and fired into the shadows. A muzzle flash answered from the tree line. "Move! Rear exit, now!" He yanked Cindy into his arms, shielding her small frame with his own as bullets chewed through the stone wall behind them. Inside the limo, Isabella reached for her phone. Tony's voice thundered over the chaos. "No calls. They'll trace it." "Then what?" "Trust me," he growled. "For once in your life, just trust me." They sprinted toward the side alley that ran behind the chapel. The rain made the cobblestones slick, each step a near fall. Sirens wailed in the distance, but not the kind that saved people. These were hunting sounds. Rico covered their flank, firing in bursts. "We can't outrun 'em, boss." Tony's mind raced. He needed a distraction, something to buy them seconds. His eyes landed on the chapel's gas main valve. "Rico, on my mark, shoot the line." Rico's eyebrows shot up. "That'll blow half the block." "Exactly," Cindy clutched his arm. "You'll get hurt." Tony looked down at her, this trembling, drenched child who had changed everything in 10 minutes, and managed a thin smile. "Not tonight, sweetheart." He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, flicked it once, and dropped it onto the puddled ground beside the leaking pipe. The explosion tore through the night, a thunderclap of flame and shrapnel. The shockwave threw them all to the ground. For a split second, the firelight reflected in Cindy's eyes like something sacred and terrible. When the ringing in his ears cleared, Tony heard nothing but the rain again. The attackers were down, some dead, others scattered. But the victory was short-lived. A slow clap echoed from the end of the alley. Justin Radcliffe stepped out of the smoke, trench coat smoldering, a cruel smile carving his scarred face. "Still got the flair for drama, huh, Tony?" Tony froze. His grip on Cindy tightened. "Long time," Radcliffe said, strolling closer. "You never returned my calls, so I figured I'd bring the RSVP myself." "Walk away, Justin." "Can't. The girl's mine." "You touch her, you die." Radcliffe laughed softly. "You think she's yours? Hell, Tony, she's your sentence. You and Virginia thought you could run? She owed me, and debt passes down bloodlines." Cindy's breath hitched. "He killed my mom!" Tony's pulse roared in his ears. "What did you say?" "She said she was sick, but she lied. He poisoned her medicine. He said he'd do the same to me unless I found you first." The world tilted. For years, Tony had believed his worst sins were behind him. But standing there, face to face with Radcliffe, he realized they'd simply been waiting for interest to accrue. "Why?" Tony rasped. "Because you don't get to walk away clean," Radcliffe said. "Not after everything you took from me. The money, the witnesses, the promotion. You burned my future. Now I burn yours." He raised his gun. Tony shoved Cindy behind him. The shot went off. Too fast to dodge. A flash of pain ripped through his shoulder, spinning him sideways. "Tony!" Isabella screamed. Rico returned fire, hitting Radcliffe's leg. The cop stumbled, snarling, and disappeared into the smoke. Tony gritted his teeth and pressed a hand against the bleeding wound. "Rico, get her out. Safe house on 54th. "What about you?" "I'll handle Radcliffe." Isabella stepped forward, defiant despite the terror in her eyes. "No, you're not doing this alone." Tony met her gaze. "You said you wanted to know who I really am. This is it." She stared at him for a long second, then reached into the limo and pulled out the gun Cindy had dropped earlier. "Then you're not the only one with something to prove," Rico muttered under his breath. "This wedding's really gone to hell." Cindy grabbed Tony's uninjured hand. "Don't let him take me." Tony knelt despite the pain. "I swear on everything I've ever done wrong. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. For the first time, she believed him. Thunder boomed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, Radcliffe's voice carried through the storm. "You can't hide forever, Romano. Blood finds blood." Tony rose, eyes hardening. "Then let it find me first." He turned to Rico. "Go." As Rico and Isabella led Cindy toward the waiting car, Tony stepped into the firelit street, gun in hand, silhouette swallowed by rain and vengeance. He was no longer the groom, no longer the reformed man. He was the devil again. And this time, the devil had something worth protecting. The rain hadn't stopped. It turned the streets into rivers, and the city into a mirror of flickering light. The black sedan ripped through the back alleys, tires screaming, smoke still rising behind them from the chapel ruins. Tony's shoulder burned, but he kept pressure on the wound, staring out the window in silence. In the back seat, Cindy leaned against Isabella, shivering. Rico drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his gun. "Safe house in 5 minutes," Rico said. "Make it 3, Tony growled. "You're bleeding, boss." "I've bled worse." But the truth was, the pain wasn't just physical. Every second that passed felt like another crack spreading through the life he'd built on lies. Isabella broke the silence. "You should have told me." Tony glanced at her. "Would it have mattered?" "Yes," she said, voice trembling. "Because I'd have known the man I was marrying still had a heart." He didn't reply. Cindy's small voice cut through the hum of the engine. "You're fighting because of me." Isabella looked down, startled. "No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." "But it is," Cindy said. "If I hadn't come—" Tony turned in his seat. "Hey, don't ever say that again." His tone softened. "You did what you had to do. You were brave." Her eyes met his, gray like storm water. "My mom said you'd understand. She said you'd know what to do." "Your mom was smart," he said quietly. Rico slowed as they approached an abandoned warehouse near the riverfront. "We're here." They slipped inside through a rusted side door. The air smelled of dust and diesel. Old shipping crates lined the walls, and a single hanging bulb cast weak light across the concrete floor. Tony leaned against a crate, blood seeping through his sleeve. Isabella immediately moved toward him. "Sit," she said firmly. "I'm fine." She gave him a look that could silence a room full of mobsters. "You're not." He exhaled and sat. She tore a strip from her ruined wedding dress and pressed it against the wound. "You always this stubborn?" "Only on days that end in Y." Despite everything, she smiled, just barely. Rico chuckled. "Glad to see the honeymoon's still on." Tony shot him a look, but even he couldn't hide the hint of a smirk. Cindy watched them quietly from the corner, clutching the photograph of her mother. "She used to say you were good once," she murmured. Tony froze. "Good?" "Yeah, that you used to make her laugh." He swallowed hard. "That was a long time ago." "She said you gave her a necklace, silver with a dove on it." The word struck him like a forgotten melody. He reached under his shirt and pulled out the same pendant. "This one?" Cindy's eyes widened. "She said if you still had it, it meant you still cared." Isabella looked away, the moment too intimate to witness. Tony tucked the necklace back under his collar. "I never stopped caring. I just stopped deserving to." The sound of rain on the roof filled the silence. Rico checked his phone. "No signal, but I'll bet Radcliffe's not done hunting. The guy's like mold, thrives in dark places." Tony's expression hardened. "Then we don't stay long. I've got a place upstate, off-grid. We regroup there." "Boss," Rico said slowly, "you think the kid's the only reason he's after you?" Tony frowned. "What are you getting at?" Rico tossed a folder onto the crate. "Found this in the car when I grabbed Cindy's bag. She had it hidden under the seat." Tony opened it. Inside were photocopied case files, names, dates, and surveillance photos from his own operation 10 years ago. Every page stamped confidential, NYPD Internal Affairs. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. "How did she get this?" Cindy shrank back. "I didn't mean to. I just took what my mom hid under the floor. She said it was important, that it would prove she wasn't lying." Tony scanned the papers. "These are from my investigation in 2016. Virginia was supposed to deliver this evidence. To me." "She said someone stopped her," Cindy said. "Someone she trusted." Tony looked up sharply. "Who?" "I don't know. She just said—" He wears a badge, but has no soul. Isabella's breath caught. Radcliffe. Tony's jaw tightened. He killed her to bury this. Rico cursed under his breath. Boss, if this leaks, half the city's dirty. Tony looked at Cindy. So small, yet holding enough truth to bring empires down. Then we make sure it doesn't leak until it's safe. Isabella met his eyes. You're going after him. I have to. Not as the old Tony, she said softly. Do it as the man your daughter believes you are. He studied her face. Tired, furious, beautiful, even in ruin. And nodded once. Outside, a thunderclap rolled across the sky, but underneath it was a different sound. A distant hum, steady and mechanical. Rico froze. Helicopter. Tony's instincts flared. They found us. Lights cut through the warehouse windows. The bulb above them flickered and died. Tony grabbed Cindy's hand. Downstairs, go! They sprinted toward the back stairwell leading to the loading docks. A spotlight swept across the room, followed by the crack of gunfire. Crates splintered, dust filled the air, and Rico returned fire with sharp precision. Isabella clutched Cindy, shielding her behind a steel pillar. Tony's shoulder burned again, but he ignored it. He aimed, fired, and dropped one of the silhouettes breaching through the upper windows. Rico shouted over the chaos, They're not cops, mercs! Tony swore. Radcliffe's hired guns. He's not waiting for due process anymore. The gunfire slowed for a second, just long enough for Tony to hear Cindy's sob. I'm sorry, she cried. I didn't mean to bring them. Tony knelt, cupping her face with blood-stained fingers. You didn't. They were coming no matter what, but they made one mistake. They came for my family. He rose, reloading. The flames of purpose burned hotter than fear. Outside, the helicopter circled lower. The warehouse rattled from the downdraft. Rico yelled, We can't hold them here! Tony nodded toward the loading bay. We won't! We run! They sprinted as the doors blew open behind them, metal shrieking, bullets whizzing past like hornets. Rico dove first, Isabella next, then Cindy. Tony covered them, his silhouette framed by the explosion of muzzle flashes. When they reached the car, Rico floored it. The vehicle fishtailed across the wet pavement, speeding into the darkness. Cindy looked back through the rear window as the warehouse erupted in flames. She didn't cry this time. Tony glanced at her in the mirror. You okay? She nodded, voice barely audible. I believe you'll keep me safe. He gave a grim smile. Then hold on tight. As the city lights vanished behind them, Tony realized something chilling. The folder Cindy carried, those case files, had been copied recently. Someone else besides Radcliffe wanted them. Someone inside Tony's old circle. And that meant betrayal was closer than he thought. The drive north felt endless. They didn't speak for hours, only the rhythm of rain on the windshield and the hum of tires over cracked asphalt. The storm had followed them out of the city, thick and heavy, as if the sky itself refused to let them go. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a cabin nestled deep in the Catskills, Tony's old hideout, built before he'd tried to go straight. A single light flickered on the porch, powered by a generator humming somewhere underground. Home sweet exile, Rico muttered as he stepped out, gun raised to scan the perimeter. Tony guided Cindy inside, his arm still bandaged from the earlier wound. The cabin smelled of cedar and dust, but it was warm. Safe, for now. Isabella followed, her wedding dress long since traded for jeans and a rain jacket from the trunk. The sight of her, stripped of elegance but fierce in defiance, hit Tony harder than he wanted to admit. As the fire crackled to life, Cindy sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching the folder of evidence. Are we going to be okay? She asked. Tony crouched beside her. Yeah, kid. Nobody's finding us here. Rico locked the door and glanced out the window. assuming nobody put a tracker in that folder. Cindy's eyes widened. Tracker? Isabella stepped in. He's kidding. Rico didn't look like he was kidding. Tony motioned for calm. We're fine. Get some rest. But rest didn't come easily. When Cindy finally drifted off by the fire, Tony sat at the table, flipping through the case files. The papers smelled faintly of mildew and perfume. Virginia's perfume, each page pulled him deeper into a past he'd tried to bury under charm and ceremony. Isabella joined him, arms folded. You're not going to stop, are you? He shook his head. I can't. Even if it gets you killed. He looked at her, tired but resolute. If I die cleaning up the mess I made, it'll be the first honest thing I've done in 20 years. Her expression softened, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand resting briefly on his. You're not that man anymore. Before he could answer, a soft creak came from the hallway. Cindy stood there, barefoot, holding something small and metallic in her hand. Tony, she said, voice shaking, this was in the folder. He took it, a USB drive, small and unmarked. He plugged it into the old laptop Rico had salvaged from the car. The screen flickered, then displayed a single folder labeled Project Seraph. Isabella frowned. What is that? Tony double-clicked. The screen filled with documents, some redacted, some bearing federal seals, photos of Virginia in hospital rooms, surveillance stills, and medical charts. One file stood out, DNA recombination study, subject CM. Tony opened it. His breath caught. The document listed 2 names under parent DNA source, Virginia Matthews, Anthony Romano. But under program origin, it read, FBI Witness Protection Genetic Identity Program, overseen by Agent Justin Radcliffe. Isabella leaned closer. What does that mean? Tony's pulse hammered. It means, Cindy isn't just my daughter. What are you talking about? She was born under witness protection, but not to protect Virginia, to erase me. The words hung in the air like a curse. He scrolled further. The report continued. Subject CM conceived via controlled donor sample from Anthony Romano as part of leverage operation against Romano crime syndicate. Guardian, Virginia Matthews. Handler, Agent Radcliffe. Isabella's eyes widened. He used her as a pawn. Tony's fists clenched. He made Virginia raise her under threat, made her believe it was for protection when he was controlling her every move. But why? To keep me obedient, Tony said bitterly. Radcliffe couldn't kill me without losing the city's leash, so he created leverage I didn't even know existed. He slammed the laptop shut. All this time, I thought I'd escaped him. Turns out, I was just a ghost dancing on his strings. Isabella touched his shoulder. Tony! He stood abruptly, pacing. He took my blood, Isabella. My life. Turned it into a weapon. Cindy's small voice broke the silence. Does that mean I'm not real? Tony froze. He turned slowly, kneeling in front of her. Hey, don't ever say that. You're realer than anything I've ever done. She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. Mom said he made her do things, that she hated lying to me, but she said I was the only good thing that ever came out of all of it. He pulled her into his arms, the embrace awkward but fierce. She was right. Behind them, Rico cleared his throat. Boss, there's more. He pointed to a final line at the bottom of the document. Secondary DNA donor, classified. Tony frowned. What does that mean? Rico hesitated. It means someone else helped Radcliffe pull this off. Someone with access to your DNA. Maybe even someone close. The words hit like a bullet. The circle tightened. Isabella stepped closer. Tony, who could that be? He met her eyes, then looked away. There's only one person who ever handled my medical files, someone I trusted to hide the past. Who? He hesitated. Dr. Elliot Vega. Rico froze. My brother? The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Tony's voice dropped. If he's involved, this whole thing runs deeper than Radcliffe, and we're not just dealing with corruption anymore. What then? Isabella asked. Tony looked toward the dark window, his reflection split by raindrops. Conspiracy. The last embers of the fire popped, scattering sparks across the hearth. Outside, the wind shifted, the faint sound of an approaching engine breaking the mountain silence. Rico's hand went to his weapon. Boss, we've got company. Tony turned, every instinct snapping awake. Lights out, everyone down. Cindy clung to him, whispering, Is it him again? Tony looked into her frightened eyes. Not if I can help it. The cabin went dark. Headlights swept across the trees. A figure stepped from the vehicle, tall, calm, carrying a flashlight and a silenced pistol. Rico aimed through the curtain. His finger hovered on the trigger. Boss, you're not going to believe who that is. The flashlight beam shifted and illuminated a face Tony hadn't seen in years. Dr. Elliot Vega. The first gunshot shattered the window before anyone could breathe. Rico dove low, returning fire into the storm. 2 shooters, maybe 3. Tony dragged Cindy behind the couch. Stay down, baby, don't move. Isabella crawled beside them, her pulse hammering. How did they find us? Tony didn't answer. He already knew. Through the glass, the flashlight beam blinked twice, a code Tony recognized. Not a kill order, a summons. Elliot, he whispered. Rico's voice rose over the thunder. Boss, we can't hold him off forever. Tony grabbed his gun and stood, signaling for Rico to cover him. Hold the line, I'll handle this. Tony, don't... Isabella reached for him, but he was already moving. He stepped into the storm, rain slicing across his face. Elliot stood by the black SUV, hands raised, calm, deliberate, like a priest awaiting confession. Tell your men to stand down, Tony called. Elliot nodded, and the gunfire stopped. The night fell eerily still, broken only by the hiss of rain and the low growl of thunder. You shouldn't have come here, Tony said, gun still raised. Elliot's face was gaunt under the headlights, eyes sunken with guilt. You think I wanted this, Tony? I tried to warn you. By sending hitmen after a 9-year-old? They weren't there to kill her. They were there to take her in, to keep her alive. Tony laughed bitterly. Alive? You mean locked in some government lab, same as her mother? Elliot's silence said everything. Tony took a step closer. Tell me the truth. All of it. Or I swear to God. She was dying, Tony, Elliot snapped. Virginia was dying, and you were already gone. Radcliffe came to me with an offer, a way to protect her. To protect you both, I thought I could control it. I was wrong. Tony's grip on the gun trembled. You signed off on this? I didn't know what Radcliffe planned. He said Cindy would be untouchable, that your enemies would never find her if she didn't exist on paper. Tony's voice dropped. And Virginia? Elliot's eyes filled. They told me she died in childbirth, but later I found her file. She lived. For 9 years they kept her under observation, pumping her full of experimental treatments when she tried to escape. He killed her. Elliot nodded, tears streaking down his face. Yes. The gun lowered slowly. The rain hissed between them like acid. Tony's voice broke. You let him kill her. I didn't know until it was too late. You were supposed to be my brother, Elliot. You fixed my wounds, saved my life more times than I can count. And this is how you pay me back? Elliot stepped closer, desperate. I can help you now. I still have access. Radcliffe's moving Cindy's file off-grid. Once he does, she'll vanish for good. Let me fix this." Tony stared at him, weighing the words against the years of lies. "Why should I believe you?" "Because if you don't, she dies." The sound of shattering wood cut through the air. Rico's voice from inside. "Boss, we're hit! Isabella's down!" Tony spun and ran, bursting through the door to find chaos. The window was blown open, smoke and glass everywhere. Rico was bleeding from the shoulder, firing into the trees. On the floor near the hearth, Isabella lay still, her side crimson. "No, no, no!" Tony dropped beside her, pressing his hands to the wound. "Stay with me." Her lips trembled. "It's not bad. Don't you lie to me." Her fingers brushed his cheek, faint but sure. "You're a terrible husband." "Yeah," he whispered, choking back tears. "But I'm trying to be a decent man." She smiled faintly. "You're getting there." Rico's voice cracked through the smoke. "Boss, they're flanking left." Tony's rage ignited. He lifted his gun, emptied the clip into the shadows until the forest went silent. Then he turned back to Isabella. But Elliot was already there, kneeling, patching the wound with his medkit. "She'll live," Elliot said, steady despite the chaos. "But we need to move, now." Tony hesitated. "Where?" "There's a tunnel beneath the cabin. It leads to an old ranger station 3 miles east. We can regroup there." Tony glanced at Cindy, trembling beside Rico. "You go first," he told her. "Stay with Isabella." "What about you?" Cindy's voice broke. "I'll be right behind you." Elliot met his eyes. "You can't stay." "Radcliffe's coming. Somebody's got to buy you time." Elliot's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He grabbed Cindy's hand and led her toward the trap door beneath the rug. Rico helped lower Isabella down, wincing with every movement. When they were gone, Tony stood alone in the smoke. The rain outside had stopped. Silence pressed heavy against the walls. He picked up Virginia's locket from the floor. Broken, half scorched, the photo inside of her holding baby Cindy. He whispered to the empty room, "I should have found you sooner." A voice behind him answered, cold and close. "But you didn't." Tony spun. Justin Radcliffe stood in the doorway, dry as bone, his badge glinting in the dim firelight. "Well," Radcliffe said, stepping inside, "isn't this poetic? The devil at the altar again?" Tony raised his gun, but Radcliffe already had his trained on him. "You think you're the hero here?" Radcliffe smirked. "You think she's your redemption story?" Tony's voice was ice. "She's my daughter." Radcliffe's grin widened. "That's what makes it so tragic. You never learned. Every good thing you touch dies." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then a gunshot. One. And Tony fell. Radcliffe lowered his weapon, breathing slow. "End of the line, Romano." He turned to leave, but from the trap door, a faint voice echoed through the smoke. "Dad." Radcliffe froze. Another shot cracked through the air, from behind. Tony wasn't dead. Bloodied, gasping, but alive. Radcliffe staggered back, hit square in the chest. Tony's voice was a whisper of fury. "Not this time!" Radcliffe collapsed, eyes wide with shock. Tony stumbled forward, dropping beside the dying man. "You took everything from me." Radcliffe coughed, blood spilling. "You were never supposed to have her." Tony stared into his eyes, then closed them for him. The world dimmed. His strength ebbed. The fire sputtered and died. Then darkness. For a long time, there was only darkness. Then, a sound. Slow, rhythmic. A monitor beeping somewhere distant. Tony's first thought was that he'd made it to hell after all, but hell didn't smell like antiseptic and burnt coffee. He opened his eyes. A small hospital room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. His chest felt like it had been caved in. A dull ache spread through his ribs, his shoulder bandaged tight. "Easy, boss," came a familiar voice. "Rico. You move, you bleed. Again." Tony tried to sit up. "How long?" "2 days. We found a field medic at the ranger station. Elliot kept you alive." Tony turned his head, saw Cindy curled up asleep in a chair, a blanket around her shoulders. "She hasn't left your side," Rico said softly. A lump caught in Tony's throat. "And Isabella?" "Resting. Doc says she'll make it. Tough lady, that one." Tony closed his eyes, breathing through the pain. The image of Radcliffe falling replayed in his mind like a ghost that refused to fade. When he opened them again, Elliot was standing in the doorway. "You look like hell." Tony managed a half smile. "Better than dead." Elliot entered quietly, closing the door. "You saved her." "Yeah," Tony said, "and nearly got her killed doing it." Elliot looked down. "You were right to hate me, but if you'll let me, I can help finish this. Radcliffe wasn't working alone. His files show there's a cleanup unit coming to erase everything tied to Project Seraph. You, Cindy, Virginia's records, all of it." Tony's jaw tightened. "When?" "Tonight." Tony shifted, ignoring the pain. "Then we end it tonight." Elliot frowned. "You can barely stand." "Then I'll crawl." Cindy stirred, waking. Her eyes found him instantly. "Dad?" The word hit harder than any bullet. Tony reached out, and she climbed onto the bed, small hands clutching his. "You're okay," she whispered. "Thanks to you." She shook her head. "I was scared. I thought you were gone." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere, kid. Not this time." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. Virginia's locket, repaired with tape. "Mom said this would keep you safe." Tony's chest tightened. She was right. Elliot watched, quiet, then said, "There's one more thing. Radcliffe's network was using an encrypted server in the city. If we can get into it, we can expose everything, every name, every account, every dirty cop and official. But we need access codes." Rico raised an eyebrow. "And let me guess, only one guy's got those." Elliot nodded. "Me." Tony studied him for a long time. "Why now? Why help us?" Elliot's expression hardened. "Because I spent 10 years pretending I didn't know what I'd done. It's time I stopped pretending." Tony leaned forward, pain flashing in his eyes. "We get that data. We burn every name connected to Project Seraph. Then we disappear." Elliot hesitated. "You can't just disappear, Tony. Once this goes public, then they'll know exactly who took their empire down." The defiance in his voice lit something in all of them. Rico cracked a grin. "Guess retirement's off the table." Cindy squeezed Tony's hand. "We're going to stop them, right?" Tony smiled faintly. "Yeah. Together." By nightfall, they were back on the road. Tony still weak but steady, Isabella awake and pale in the back seat. She reached for his hand as they drove through the winding mountain roads toward the city lights. "You shouldn't be doing this," she murmured. "I've run from ghosts long enough," Tony said. "It's time I fight one." She managed a small smile. "When this is over, what then?" He glanced at her, the city skyline reflecting in his eyes. "Then I learn how to be her father. Maybe even your husband, if you still want that." She let out a quiet laugh. "We'll see if you survive first." Behind them, Cindy hummed softly, the same lullaby Virginia used to sing. The sound steadied Tony more than morphine ever could. They reached the outskirts of the city just past midnight. Elliot led them through a service entrance into an abandoned government building, Radcliffe's old command hub. The air smelled of dust and decay. Rows of dead monitors lined the walls. "Servers on the sub-level," Elliot said. "Once I plug in, we'll have maybe 5 minutes before they trace us." Rico cocked his gun. 5 minutes is all I need." Cindy stayed close to Tony, eyes wide. "This place feels bad." He squeezed her hand. "That's because it is." As they descended into the dark, the sound of dripping water echoed off concrete. The servers hummed faintly, still alive beneath the silence. Elliot worked fast, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Almost there." The lights flickered. Isabella tensed. "Someone's here." Rico turned. "We've got movement upstairs." Tony's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "Too many." Elliot's voice rose. "I need 30 more seconds." Tony raised his gun. "You've got 20. Footsteps thundered down the stairwell. Armored men, black uniforms, visors reflecting the emergency lights. Tony fired first, each shot echoing like thunder. Rico followed, covering the flank. Cindy crouched behind a server rack, clutching the locket. Isabella shielded her, eyes sharp. Elliot shouted over the noise. "Got it! Uploading files now!" Tony spun and dropped another attacker, his shoulder tearing open again from the recoil. "Move it, Doc." "Almost done!" A bullet struck the console, sparks flying. Elliot cursed, typing faster. "System's failing. Wait, got it. Data transferred to cloud." Tony shouted, "Then let's go!" But a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Well, well," drawled a man from the shadows. "Didn't expect to see you breathing, Romano." A new figure stepped into the light, scarred, cold, unmistakably alive. Radcliffe. Tony's blood froze. "You should have stayed dead," Radcliffe sneered. "Now I have to kill you twice." Tony aimed his gun. "You're supposed to be buried." Radcliffe smirked. "You think I'd die that easy? You forget who trained you to survive, kid." Tony's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you forget who learned to finish the job." They fired simultaneously. The explosion of sound shook the room. When the smoke cleared, both men were down. Cindy screamed. But as she ran toward her father, Tony's hand moved. He was alive, barely. And in his other hand, a small, hard drive glinted red. Elliot grabbed it, shaking. He did it. He got the full upload. Tony's voice was hoarse. "Get her out of here." Isabella knelt beside him, tears streaming. "I'm not leaving you again." Tony's lips curved faintly. "Then we finish it together." The sirens wailed outside. But this time, Tony didn't run. He'd found something worth standing for, a family, a truth, and a second chance. He rose slowly, bloodied but unbroken, and whispered to Cindy, "You wanted to know if I'm your dad?" She nodded through tears. He smiled. "You just made me one." The city never slept. Even at 3 a.m., sirens wailed like ghosts through steel canyons, and the rain turned every streetlight into a trembling halo. Tony watched it all from the rooftop across from the Federal Data Center, the true heart of Radcliffe's network. Beneath those glowing windows lay the last backup of Project Seraph. If they didn't destroy it, Cindy's name would never be erased. Rico adjusted his earpiece. "Perimeter sweep shows 2 patrols, 10 on rotation. You really think we can waltz in?" Tony checked his watch. "Not waltz. Dance." Elliot looked up from his tablet. "Once I connect this drive, the system will open a 5-minute vulnerability. After that, it seals forever." "Then we don't waste a second." Cindy waited in the van, bundled in Isabella's jacket. "You promised I could see the stars when this was over?" she whispered. Tony smiled faintly. "You will." He touched her forehead, the gesture gentle, almost reverent. Then he turned and disappeared into the storm. Inside, the world was a maze of glass and steel. Security lights flashed red as they moved, silent, efficient, shadows within shadows. Rico took point, Elliot behind him with the hard drive, Tony last. They reached the main server room, a vast cathedral of humming machines. Elliot whispered, 30 seconds. Tony scanned the doors. Make it 20. He'd learned long ago that plans had expiration dates, and this one was already starting to rot. As Elliot connected the drive, Tony saw movement in the reflection of the glass wall. A guard patrol, closer than expected. Down, he hissed. They crouched behind a terminal as two men entered, talking quietly. The words blurred under the static hum. Rico tensed, hand on his weapon. Tony shook his head. Not yet. Then a faint beep from the laptop. The upload was live. The guards heard it instantly. What was that? Tony acted. In one fluid motion, he rose, disarmed the first guard, and sent the second sprawling. No shots, no noise, only breath and speed. Keep it running, he ordered Elliot. 2 minutes left. The building lights flickered. Alarms began to pulse. Company's coming, Rico warned. Tony's pulse quickened, but his voice stayed calm. Then we hold. Through the glass doors, black-clad operatives poured in. Not police, not agents. Radcliffe's cleanup crew, masked and precise. Tony fired once, the shot echoing through the hall. Sparks showered from a light fixture, throwing the room into chaos. Rico laid down cover fire as Tony pulled Elliot towards the console. How long? 30 seconds! Tony's mind raced. Too many enemies, too little time. And then, over the intercom, a voice he knew. Tony, it said, smooth as silk. Put the drive down. He froze. A figure stepped into the doorway. Tall, calm, composed. Director Holt, Radcliffe's superior. I have men on every exit, Holt continued. Hand over the evidence and the girl lives a long, safe life. Tony's jaw tightened. You've got her? Of course, Holt said pleasantly. We collected her from your van 10 minutes ago. She's in good hands. Isabella's voice crackled through the radio, panicked. Tony, they took her! The world tilted. He turned back to Elliot. Finish it! But now, Elliot hit the final command. The servers blazed white, data cascading into the network, then burning itself out. A digital inferno. Holt's calm voice turned sharp. What have you done? Tony holstered his weapon, stepping into the open. Burned your house down. Romano, Holt warned. Don't test me. Tony's gaze hardened. You already did. With her. He moved first. A flash, a blur, and chaos erupted again. Gunfire snapping, glass exploding, alarms screaming through the dark. Rico pulled Elliot behind cover, shouting, He's buying us time! But Tony wasn't just fighting. He was hunting. Every step took him closer to the elevator where Holt retreated, barking orders into his comm. When the smoke cleared, Tony stood alone. Holt was gone. He looked toward the stairwell and heard a child's voice echo faintly from above. Dad. Cindy, he bolted. The rooftop was slick with rain, the wind howling like a living thing. Holt held Cindy at the edge, one arm locked around her. Let her go, Tony shouted. Holt smiled. You really think redemption is bought this cheap? You're a murderer, Romano. Always were. Maybe, Tony said, stepping forward. But I'm done killing for people like you. Holt tightened his grip on Cindy. Then watch what your mercy costs. Cindy kicked, twisting free just enough for Tony to move. He fired once. The bullet struck Holt's shoulder, spinning him backward. Cindy stumbled away, but Holt lunged, grabbing her again. Tony dropped his gun, hands raised. Let her go. It's over. Holt sneered. You're right. He shoved her off the ledge. Tony dove. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Rain suspended mid-air, city lights blurring into white. His hand caught hers just before she fell. The force nearly tore his shoulder apart, but he held on, gritting through the pain. Got you, he gasped. Below them, the street yawned open like a mouth of glass and water. Cindy's tears mixed with rain. Don't let go. Never. Behind him, Holt staggered up, raising his gun, but a single shot rang from across the rooftop. Isabella stood at the stairwell, weapon steady, eyes blazing. Holt crumpled without a word. Tony pulled Cindy up, collapsing onto the rooftop as sirens wailed below. She buried her face in his chest, shaking. You came back. Always, he whispered. Elliot and Rico burst through the door moments later, the storm soaking them both. It's done, Rico said. The files are live, every name, every secret. The whole system's going down. Tony looked out over the city, lights flickering like distant stars through the rain. He felt the weight of years lift, leaving only exhaustion and something new. Peace. Cindy tugged his sleeve. Does this mean we can go home now? He smiled, pulling her close. Yeah, kid. It means we finally can. Isabella stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. You kept your promise. Tony nodded, voice rough but steady. This time, I finish what I start. Hours later, dawn rose over New York. News anchors spoke of whistleblowers, leaked files, and the fall of men who once seemed untouchable. The Romano name, once drenched in fear, became a symbol of truth. At the pier where Virginia once dreamed of leaving the city, Tony watched the water with Cindy on his shoulders. Isabella stood beside them, smiling through tears. You see those, Tony said, pointing upward. Stars still lingered in the brightening sky. Cindy nodded. You promised. And I keep my promises. She leaned her head against his. I love you, Dad. Tony's throat tightened. I love you too, little one. The past would never vanish completely. Scars never do. But for the first time, Tony didn't fear tomorrow. He welcomed it. 3 weeks later, the city's heartbeat had changed. Newspapers screamed headlines about corruption, resignations, and arrests. Anonymous files had dismantled entire departments. Project Seraph was no longer a rumor whispered in back rooms. It was a scandal that cracked open an empire. But none of that made the morning any less simple. The sea mist rolled across the Hudson, painting everything in soft gold. A small cafe near the pier buzzed with life, the clinking of dishes, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread. At a corner table sat Tony Romano, no longer the king of the underworld, no longer the man with blood on his cuffs. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a faint scar still visible above his collarbone. Across from him, Cindy spooned sugar into her cocoa, pretending she wasn't watching him with wide, curious eyes. Go easy on that, he said. You'll be bouncing off walls. She grinned. I like bouncing. He smiled. Yeah, I noticed. Isabella arrived carrying a tray, eggs, toast, 2 coffees. She set it down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You two look too peaceful. Should I be worried? Tony looked up at her, warmth in his eyes. We were just talking about new beginnings. She arched a brow. Is that what we call sugar addiction now? Cindy giggled, the sound brighter than any church bell. For a few minutes, the world was only that. Laughter, food, the rhythm of life returning. Then Rico appeared at the door, wearing a battered leather jacket and that same grin that had gotten him out of trouble 100 times. Well, I'll be damned, he said. You actually look normal. Tony stood, shaking his hand. Don't ruin it. Rico handed him an envelope. From the DA's office, full pardon. Turns out when you topple half the state's corruption ring, people forget a few felonies. Tony opened it, scanning the papers. For the first time in decades, his name wasn't a threat. It was a beginning. He looked at Rico. You sticking around? Rico shrugged. Nah, heading south. Heard Miami's got a shortage of sarcastic ex-gangsters. Then stay out of trouble. Trouble misses me when I'm gone. They both laughed, a rare, unguarded sound. When Rico left, Tony turned back to his family. Yes, family. The word still felt strange, but it fit now, like a long-forgotten suit he finally grew into. Isabella sipped her coffee. So what now? We just live? Tony gazed out the window at the skyline. Yeah, we live. And if the past comes knocking again, we don't hide. We answer it together. Cindy leaned forward. Can we move somewhere with horses? Mom used to say I'd love them. Tony nodded. Horses sound good. Isabella smiled softly. You're serious? He looked between them. For the first time in my life. Outside, the morning sun crept higher, washing the city clean. The sins of yesterday didn't vanish. They never do. But for Tony Romano, they no longer defined him. He had something stronger than power now. He had peace. Cindy tugged his sleeve. Dad? Yeah? She smiled shyly. You think Mom can see us? Tony's throat tightened. He looked out towards the water, where the light shimmered across the waves. Yeah, he said quietly. And I think she's proud. Isabella placed her hand over his. We all are. He looked at her, the woman who'd seen his worst and still stayed. And for once, words failed him. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to it, simple and sure. Cindy giggled. Gross! They laughed, all three of them, and in that laughter lived everything they'd fought for. Redemption, forgiveness, love. A seagull cried overhead. The city stirred to life again. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of that morning, the world turned, not into something perfect, but something worth living in. Tony glanced at the camera Isabella had set on the table, still recording for her small documentary series. He gave a faint smile to the lens. If you're still watching, he said, remember this. No one's too far gone to start over. Just gotta be brave enough to face what's left standing. He winked. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button. Maybe we'll tell you what happened next. The screen would fade on their laughter, the sound of the tide, and a city finally exhaling. Because sometimes even devils earn their wings.